Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kanchan Malhotra and I am the chapter lead for Women in Data Edison. Today's event format will be a panel discussion. I will be asking a series of questions to our panelists and we will leave some time for Q&A at the end. Our first panelist for the evening is Anne K. Emery. She is an internationally acclaimed speaker and has consulted to more than 150 organizations, including the United Nations, Centers for Disease Control, and Harvard University. Our second panelist for the evening is Rebecca Pop. She is the founder of WizLog, a data visualization and storytelling lab that offers training and consulting services. WizLog's mission is to help companies and organizations communicate more effectively with data. A very warm welcome to you both. I am very excited to have you here and looking forward to a great discussion. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. So I'll be muting everyone to avoid unnecessary background noise. Please feel free to type in your questions in the chat box and we will make sure to review them at the end. So before we really get into the technicalities of data visualization, I would really like to know about your personal story. Rebecca, I would really like to know, how you got started with data visualization, what motivated you, what inspired you to get into data visualization. Keep it simple, and if you could answer all the questions first, and then Rebecca, if you could go next, that would be great.
Okay, great.
She's still not able to, okay, good.
I'm good now. I kept getting these error messages. Hey everybody, I'm Anne Emery and I'm a data visualization designer and trainer. And I just started year 7 of business, which is crazy. You blink and 7 years go by. So early on in my business, I did a lot of consulting work where people would send me their spreadsheets. I'd analyze the data and make a dashboard or write a report for them. But I've niched down over the years and now I focus on training because that's what I enjoy best. So I do a lot of virtual training nowadays, virtual workshops. I have online courses, live events too. So, I've gotten a chance to travel all over the world and all over the US training, and I've gotten to work with some really cool orgs. So now I kind of mostly know what I was doing. I very hesitantly clicked expert on that poll. I was like, well, if I don't click expert, I do this for a living. Like maybe I have some imposter syndrome. I wanted to say like intermediate, though, to be honest. It wasn't, so, I didn't always do this for a living. In fact, I used to make really, really mediocre visualizations. So when I think back to, almost 15 years ago, my first job out of college, I remember being in that job. I was there, I don't know, a couple months. So I'm 22 or something, 23, however old you are when you finish your bachelor's. And I remember I still had that college mindset where you just work till the job's done. Sure, you mostly work 9 to 5, but if I had to work till 6 or 7, that was just kind of what I did. And I used to live in the DC area, and that's what everybody does there. So I remember working late one night on this report, and I work with a lot of federal agencies now, and I also used to consult to a lot of federal agencies then. And I was working on this report, working on it, putting my all into it. And I remember my boss came into my office, and she was really a good boss, really, really in hindsight. I'm so thankful I had her. She really took me under her wing and kind of recognized that, I was new on the job and she cared about me a lot. And she said, Anne, I know you want to do a great job on all these graphs in the report, but let's be honest, nobody's going to read this report. It's just a dusty shelf report. And I was like, what do you mean nobody's going to read it? We're being paid over $100,000 to write this report. I've been working on this analysis for weeks. I've made the best graphs I can possibly make, which were Excel defaults with pie charts with 10 slices exploding. They were horrible graphs, but I didn't know that at the time. My eyes hadn't been open to what was possible with Viz. And she just said, think about it. This is a 100-page report. It's full of statistical jargon. Of course, these people in these federal agencies we're sharing it with aren't going to read it. Would you read it? And I was just so crushed. And I remember thinking, is this my life? This is what I'm going to do for the next like till I'm 65 for the next decades, I'm just going to write reports that nobody reads. And it just felt truly like my soul went like this and all of my happiness levels. And, I'm a fairly optimistic person, but I felt really depressed after that. And I went on this journey to think about like, how can I make this not the norm? And luckily discovered data visualization. And like early on, Edward Tufte and Stephen Few and kind of the early people who were doing this, Gar Reynolds, who does a lot of presentation work, and slowly started experimenting and experimenting and experimenting to get up to the point where, yes, now I finally write reports that actually make a difference in organizations and in policies. So if anybody has any questions too about like, if you're thinking about going solo, we're having Q&A at the end. What was it like in the beginning? What is it like now? Anything along those lines, let me know, because I've kind of learned it all the long hard way over the years, from those early dusty shelf reports into lots of experimenting into like finally knowing what I'm doing to the point of being able to pass the baton to the next generation of people doing data viz. What about you, Rebecca? How did you get started?
Can you guys hear me? All right. So you are started with your first job. I go back maybe 3-4 more years because I think that's where my journey truly started. I don't think it was apparent back then. It became apparent probably a decade later. But thinking back, right, from where I stand right now, I think that was truly the origin. So over 10 years ago, I was in college, so you can try to guess my age. And in college, I started communication. So totally different from working with data, right? I was planning to work with words, not with data. And the reason I studied communication was because I was very interested in people, how people perceive information, how you would communicate information. I was very interested in perception, right? In understanding your audience, which, 10 years down the road still plays a key role because that's very important in data visualization. Your audience perception is key, right? But back then I thought that I was interested in words, I studied communication. Then I went to do my master's, and as I was doing my master's, I realized that yes, words are powerful, but data is even more powerful because data can be very convincing, right? People believe numbers, people believe statistics. So then I took a turn and I started studying data. So I took a ton of classes in statistics, in research, methods of research. I graduated, and then I worked as a data analyst in marketing, in media, and I loved it. I loved it, but along the way, I started realizing that there's so much emphasis on learning how to work with data, be it, how to access it, store it, clean it, match it, anything that has to do with data. And there's very little emphasis on how to communicate with data. And that's a big problem because honestly, at the end of the day, your client won't ask you how much data you have or how many hours you spend cleaning the data. At the end of the day, your client will ask you, or internal stakeholders, right? If you present internally, they will ask you, what can I do with these results, right? How can this influence my decisions? So then I realized that there's this huge gap of how to communicate with data, whether that's graphs or verbal presentations. So I thought, well, who best to start looking into this if not me, given that, I studied communication and then I worked with data. It's kind of a great fit, right in the middle. So honestly, I became obsessed with data visualization. I studied day and night, read, exercised, and mentioned Tufte. I went to one of his workshops, which was amazing, absolutely amazing. And for those of you who don't know, Tufte is somewhat of the father of modern data visualization. I would say many practitioners have been influenced by his work a lot. So yeah, I started studying a lot, and as I was studying, I realized that like one piece was missing. Like you could read, you could practice, but one big piece that would help you learn more is to teach others, right? That really challenges to step out from your comfort zone and question yourself and learn at a much deeper level. So then I started teaching at the University of Chicago, where I still teach currently part-time. And I think that was really important in my journey of learning data visualization because I started understanding not just what questions I had, but what questions other people have as well, right? So it gave me both a deeper understanding and a more broader understanding as well. So honestly, after that, I started Vislo, which is my company. The company offers data visualization and storytelling workshops and consulting services. And I think it's my mission, honestly, to change the way people communicate with data, regardless of the field they come from. I truly believe in the power of data visualization and data storytelling. So I hope that you'll be inspired and you'll believe in it as well, and that you'll take it upon yourself to learn more.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey. Okay, moving on. Next question I have is, how do you approach a data visualization problem? When you're working on a data set, do you have standard steps, best practices that you follow every time? Are there any key focus areas one should be mindful of? So, Anne, if you could get us started.
This is a really tricky one. I would need, I feel like, a day to fully answer this because, Rebecca and I teach people how to do for a living. So there's many, many steps. But I'm going to focus on one because we only have half an hour till Q&A. So I would say something so important to know in advance is whether your audience is technical or non-technical. And you're going to laugh at my very, very poor definition here, but technical would be people who like data, which is a lot of us at this event tonight. Like, do you love opening a spreadsheet? Do you like data cleaning? I mean, okay, that's a horrible example. Data cleaning can feel like a chore sometimes, but is this something that you look forward to? You're in a data career on purpose. If so, you're probably a technical person. I feel very at home in spreadsheets. I feel like at my core, I'm a spreadsheet person and I just do visualization because that's the next step needed to get the data out of spreadsheets. But I'm really a data analyst person at my core. Non-technical audiences, they're the opposite. They're the people who they'd rather just hire you to do it. They'd rather hire a consultant to work on their data. They'd rather hire some staff members to work on their data. They're just not into the data. They don't open a spreadsheet and go, oh yes, I wonder what gems I'm gonna find in here. They open it and they think oh, what a mess, I hate this. It's probably the last thing on their to-do list that they wanna tackle and they probably procrastinate it. So I think knowing which side you're on, are we as the data people, are we technical or non-technical? Probably all of us here are technical people, but then what is your audience? And I think recognizing that most of us are going to be technical, but most of our audience members are going to be non-technical. I'd say 99% of the world is probably non-technical, where they're really good at hiring staff, managing budgets, running companies, doing the actual work, all of the non-data work, that's their specialty. And understanding that distinction, it affects everything else you do in a project. So it affects things like what type of dissemination format you're going to use. Are you going to share the data in a dashboard or an infographic or some slides or a one-pager? What format's going to match your audience? Because technical and non-technical audiences are going to have different preferences. And it also influences things like how you format each graph. Do you show decimal places or not? Do you have tables to accompany your graph or not? Because as you can imagine, the technical audiences like me are going to be like, ooh, where's the CSV file? I want to explore. And the non-technical audiences are going to be like, give me the one pager, give me the infographic version, give me the version that's rounded to the nearest whole number, and give me the so what so that I can inform my decisions and move on. What about you, Rebecca?
Rebecca?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I think I was muted. It's hard to get unmuted. So I think this is a very timely question and I love it. I agree with Anne. It takes more than half an hour to answer this question. It takes probably more than a day if you want to go in depth. But the reason I'm saying that it's timely is because I'm actually organizing a public workshop on November 10th, and I'll share more about this later before the Q&A session. But that workshop is about the steps that one has to take before visualizing the data. It's 2.5 hours, it's not a day or multiple days, so it's still a condensed version. But I think that goes back to the point of thinking strategically and of being very thoughtful before you visualize the data. I think that's one pitfall that myself included, and I think many of us fall into, which is, oh, I have the data, I cleaned it, I have very little time, let's just visualize it. And that's wrong, and wrong in the sense that you might end up spending more time visualizing the data because you don't have a plan, right? You have to kind of design the path that you're going to kind of get a better understanding of what you're doing. So from that perspective, there are many steps that I suggest one should take. And those are not identical for every project. They do vary a little bit by project, but I would say two things that I think everyone should pause and think about even before looking at the data, honestly, is one, thinking about the problem at hand. So if your client came and said, hey, I need this for XYZ, or your internal stakeholder came and said that they need something, truly understanding the business problem, right? How are you going to use that? Not just what data you need, but what decision are you trying to make based on that data? Because that will inform also what type of data you would be looking for. And then secondly, understanding your audience. And that goes back to Anne's point, right, about technical or non-technical. So I would say there are even more variables when you think about your audience, such as one, data literacy level, right? How much does your audience know about the data, for example? If they don't know a lot, then maybe you should explain the metrics. Maybe you should have a definition of the metrics, for example. If they do know a lot, that's not needed, right? Or maybe they want more granular data, right? So just understanding different variables that define your audience so that you really know what you're going after. And I think once you have a clear understanding of the business problems, not the data problem, the business problem, and the clear understanding of your audience, again, multiple characteristics in terms of needs and what they are looking for, I think then you should start digging into the data and thinking about visualizing it.
Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your views on that. The next question I have is on data integrity and data ethics. I think these are the hot topics that's going on now because data is becoming more accessible and everybody's getting into visualizing and using their data. So what is your take on data integrity and ethics? Anne?
Let me share a real life example of what not to do. And I know a couple people who attended tonight. So Eliana, you heard a similar story just an hour ago in office hours. Okay, here's what not to do. I work in a lot of different topic areas for federal government agencies, foundations, nonprofits. And one of the topic areas I work on a lot is public health. So I was working on a project recently, and it was an HIV testing center where people from the community come in. They fill out an intake form with their health history, they get tested, they get the results later and go on their way. And the group sent me their Excel file with the graphs that I was supposed to edit as part of our project together. They thought they just sent the graphs, things like how many tests they did each month, all of the composite overall summary graphs for all of these thousands of people. But they accidentally sent me all the underlying data that, even though I had signed a non-disclosure form, I was not supposed to see. So when I looked at all the sheets in the bottom of the Excel file, I would go to unhide to try to find some graphs I needed. And I saw everybody's names, addresses, how many sexual partners they'd had in the past 12 months, their past drug use, and like how often they reported using cocaine or injection drugs, and all of this, whether they tested HIV positive or not, like major HIPAA violations that I am not supposed to see and don't want to see. I don't need to know those people's health history. So of course I reached out and I said, hey, did you mean to send this? Like, just so you know, even if you don't see this sheet, it's still there. It's still like part of the file, even if it's hidden. And I gave them a little quick Zoom tutorial on like how to hide and unhide sheets in Excel. Of course, they were terrified because I think the woman was thinking through everybody else she'd sent this file to and accidentally shared very confidential information. So there's probably a really long list of things you should do to be ethical and have integrity with your data, but that's probably the number one thing of not to do, not accidentally share data. You know, we all have good intentions. I haven't ever met somebody, thousands of participants I've worked with, I've never ever met somebody who's purposefully doing bad, unethical data work. Never. I think everybody I've ever met has had good intentions, but it's just those like little mistakes too, it can kind of lead to disaster to be careful with.
Thank you, Anne. Rebecca?
So the first thing that comes to my mind is the moments when I heard, and it happened many times, people say that data speaks by itself. And I don't think it does. I don't think it ever does, because no matter how unbiased and how objective we try to be, we have a background, right? We have a set of experiences, we have perceptions, we have opinions, and we filter any data set through all of that. So I think one key main step that everyone should take before looking at any data set is to try to leave some of that background behind. Try to be aware of potential biases and try to leave those behind as much as possible. I don't have an example similar to Anne's example, but I have a different example, which I don't know if it's better or worse, but it happened maybe 5-6 years ago. I was working full-time. I was a data analyst, working with a client that was very demanding and whose bonus was dependent on how his team performed. And part of my report was to show his team's performance. So you can imagine that there's a lot of pressure on getting good results, right? But the results are only as good as the data shows that they are, right? So there were a few instances in which the client tried to put pressure on me and on my team to pretty much fabricate the results, right? Pretty much, I mean, obviously no one would say directly, hey, can you add another number? But they would say things like, well, can you go back and check that again? I think it might be wrong. I'm pretty sure the results were different. Or can you go back and see, maybe you're missing a part of the file? You know, they are trying to kind of find a nicer way of saying that you should pretty much fabricate the data. So I don't know if this is something that others have encountered, but I think it's a very tough situation to be in, especially if you're more at the beginning of your career, right? I mean, we all want to succeed. We all want to perform well in our jobs. We all want that promotion, right? Bigger salary. And maybe we don't feel like we can speak up. So what do you do in that situation, right? I mean, I don't have the perfect answer for that. But I think that that's when you have to pause and think about your integrity as a person and how far you should go or you shouldn't go. And then based on that, you know, you could talk to the right person or try to push back, or, you know, if nothing works and the organization is choosing to go a different way, then maybe you should part ways. But yeah, I think it's a tough situation to be in, and it makes you question your integrity as a person, not just of the data and of how you work with data.
Okay, moving on to the next question. So this is, I think, for our audience, a lot of them are beginners. So how do we get into data visualization? There's a lot of resources out there these days with the number of tools, number of courses. So what would be your advice, where to start? And if you could get us started.
Yeah, I'd say it depends a little bit on your career stage and your data viz stage. So at first, it's important to learn a little bit about a lot of different tools. Just get your feet wet with what's out there. So I'd recommend make a list of 5 or 10 tools that you've heard of. I'll give you the list. It's going to be the common ones: Excel, Tableau, Power BI, InDesign, Python, like all the common 5 or 10 tools, and learn the 1-hour version of all of those tools. So maybe take a 1-hour training, paid or unpaid, or at least do, 1 hour of YouTube training at the very least, and just see what's out there so that you kind of know generally what each tool is capable of at a very surface level. But after a while, it usually makes sense to specialize in just one or two tools. And this was a really hard thing for me because I remember Tableau became like a thing when I was on maternity leave. It was like I blinked, I went away for a couple months, like took care of kid number one. And when I came back to the world, it was like, oh, everybody's using Tableau. And I felt like I missed it. I thought, oh my gosh, I've been using Excel and Word and PowerPoint for all these years because that's what all my clients are using. That was the tool of choice. So it made sense for me to specialize in that. And then everybody's like, Anne, can you train on Tableau? Can you consult on Tableau? I was like, what is this thing? When is this a big deal? It was just like happened so quickly. And I felt like I just missed out on like this huge rise of Tableau. So I spent a couple of years thinking like, oh gosh, I better master Tableau. And like, while I'm at it, I better also master Power BI. And then, geez, I should probably learn coding. I should learn R because everybody seems to be using R. And like, none of that has mattered. In fact, everybody now hires me because they're like, good, you use Excel. That's what we use. We don't have time to go be a graphic designer. We don't have time to go learn coding. We just want to use everyday tools. And like, phew, that's actually really helped me in the long run. So if you're dealing with that mental hurdle, like I did for a couple of years in there, just rest assured that that's normal, that it's very normal to feel a lot of pressure to learn everything. So, at first learn like 1 hour about 10 different tools, but then take an actual training, do like the 10-hour training on just one tool and go deeper and specialize. There's a ton of good courses out there. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. I have some too, if you're curious.
Right. So what's your take on this, Rebecca?
So I would say that first, that would be my approach. First, think about how you would use data visualization, because if I think of where data visualization was, honestly, even 2-3 years ago versus where it is now, it became more and more fragmented, which is normal, right? As the field evolves, it matures, and then it becomes more fragmented. So think about it from the point of view of whether, for example, you want to use static or interactive data visualization, right? There are different tools that you would use for those. Or think if you want to use data visualization for business, if you're thinking of using dashboards or just charts. Think if you want to do maybe more what is called more like art, beautiful data visualizations, things that you see in the media. Those would require more custom coding. So for that, maybe you don't want to use Excel, not even Tableau. Maybe you want to go into Python or R, something more complex. So just kind of think about where you're trying to get before you start taking any step. I think that's very important. So just pause and evaluate what your goal is. And once you do that, that's true. There's so much out there, which is great, right? There are a lot of even free resources. So it can feel overwhelming. I was actually talking to someone the other day who asked me the same question, as a person who wants to get into data visualization, and she was telling me that it's very overwhelming. It seems like you can learn everything, but you only have a few hours probably to allocate to this in a day, especially if you work full time, right? So I would say start small to then build on it and kind of get it bigger, get to where you want. So start by saying, hey, this week I have 5 hours. I'm going to learn tool A. Next week, I have 6 hours. I'm going to read a book and I'm going to start creating a chart or participating. There are a ton of projects that you can join online. Like Makeover Monday is one, for example, or Storytelling with Data has one, where you can join a community and practice. So you can do that, right? And then get feedback, which is also very important, getting feedback and iterating. But definitely, to summarize, create a plan, because you need to know what your goal is before you start taking any step. And 2, just start small. It seems more achievable if you do that, and you won't feel overwhelmed.
Thank you, the both of you. This is great advice. And of course, you both have an organization that you both offer training. So people definitely look into the data visualization courses that Anne and Rebecca have. I'm sure they are great. Okay, this is a good segue, I think, this is to our next question, because we just talked about how data visualization has progressed over the years. And I've been reading a lot of articles lately where the notion is that the dashboards are getting obsolete. There is also talk about AI coming into picture for creating, artificial intelligence-led data visualizations. So I'm really curious to know from both of you what your thoughts are. So, Anne?
2020 has been such a bizarre year that, if you asked me in January or February, I would have been like, oh, here is my very estimated guess of everything that's going to happen. But this year I've learned to just accept that we're on this wild ride and who even knows. So this is a really tough one for me to answer. You know how in the beginning I said I was working on this technical report, I was working, like pouring my blood, sweat, and tears into it. And then my boss was like, time out. This is a dusty shelf report. When I used to write dusty shelf reports, that was the norm in my field, working with applied researchers, evaluators, social scientists, scientists like CDC scientists or NIH scientists. That was definitely the norm 10, 15 years ago. That's slowly changed, like one step at a time that's changed, where I still see some dusty shelf reports being done here and there, but there's so much awareness of this isn't all we can do. We can also make some slides. We can also do some dashboards. We can also do infographics. We can also have a 1-pager or a 5-pager. So that luckily is changing. And I really hope that continues to change, because honestly, seeing all the time and the budget being poured into documents that nobody's going to read fully because they're just so dense and jargony, that needs to be retired. That needs to be a thing of the past. And then there's all these kind of fads or buzzwords. So I remember my very first conference presentation, 2008, 2009, it was peak dashboard buzzword. If you would go back and do a Google search of buzzwords, it was that was the thing, was dashboards, and static dashboards, not even interactive dashboards, not even dashboards where you could drill down to the data, just the idea of having a 1-page PDF with key metrics. That was groundbreaking at the time. What came next? Infographics. That was a buzzword for a while. Donut charts in my line of work was a buzzword. Everybody was making donut charts. Page 1 donut chart, page 2 donut chart, page 3 donut chart. What is it now? It was big data. Then it was data science. Now it's AI. So I don't know what it's going to be next. I have no idea. I don't know. Rebecca, do you have a crystal ball? Can you make some predictions?
So I should caveat everything by saying that my husband actually works in AI, so I kind of have, a bit of an understanding from him. I don't think that AI will replace analysts, honestly, and maybe I'm in denial, who knows, I hope I'm not. But I think that unique ability of understanding your audience, of understanding the business problem, cannot really be replaced by AI. Yes, maybe the data cleaning process, the data matching process, all that data analysis, maybe part of that or all of it can be replaced eventually by AI. But I think that data visualization and data storytelling has a strong human component, and that I don't see as being replaced by AI anytime. Not anytime soon, but anytime. At least that's my perspective. I would also say that to me, in order to kind of understand where a field is going, and I think that was also Anne's approach, is important to kind of look behind, right? Look at what happened in the past and how things have evolved. And I mentioned earlier, data visualization has evolved, at least from my perspective, very fast. I mean, what data visualization is today is not what it was 2-3 years ago at all. So I think that first there was this wave of tools, right? Tools were, and they still are, very easily accessible. They are, not expensive for an individual or for an organization to buy them. So then everyone started using templates, right? And everyone was creating visualizations, which is great, but not everyone knew how to create them well, like how to tell a story with it. Then came the second wave where people became more and more interested to learn the rules. And I think we are still kind of there, where most people who work with data, data analysts, business analysts, or any other field where people work with data, I think we are still in the area where or in at the point where people learn the rules, right? You read a few books, you attend a few courses, you learn the rules. Well, the next step, I think, is to learn how to break the rules. Because in data visualizations, rules are meant to be broken. And by that, I mean that no rule is set in stone. I strongly believe that there is no wrong and right in data visualization. There are things that are not recommended in most cases, but there are always exceptions. And when you get to the point where you can break those rules and you know why you broke them and specifically what rules you broke, I think that's when you are more advanced in data visualization. And I think that eventually that's where we'll get. We are not there yet, but I think that's what the future holds.
Moving on, yeah, this is interesting too. So data visualization is a very competitive field, right? How can one stand out from the crowd and make an impression?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many options for standing out. You could stand out with your content area, whether that's you're really good at policy visualizations, children and family visualizations, public health visualizations. Your content area is a great starting point for a lot of us because, I'm not a content expert. I am a data viz person, data viz expert. I'll use that term very hesitantly. So when I go into a new project, I'm really relying on the content people to teach me what their lingo is and what background information I need to know. And like, that's a huge asset to have people on the team who have that content area. You could stand out with your software skills by specializing in just a tool or two. You can also specialize in your communication skills and your people skills. It's actually very rare to find people who are great at managing projects, understanding what the end users need. Like that is such an underlooked skill. I hate the term soft skill. I wish we had a better term for this because it's so critical to the project to have people who like actually can talk to people. It's very rare in the data field to be actually able to talk to people. So there's so many options. I'd say though, for people getting started, having a public facing portfolio is critical. And whether you're a salaried person or you want to branch out on your own and start your own company, having public facing work is so important. And that could take so many forms. Like if you like Tableau, post a lot of visualizations on your Tableau public profile. If you like R, the R community uses GitHub, post your code there and connect with other people. If you want to start a blog or a podcast, that's how I got started, was blogging. And that's how I've gotten all of my projects. People say, I've been following your blog for years. You were the natural choice to come keynote our conference. Like that's been critical for me, is having that portfolio of projects there. So just kind of demonstrating that you have a skill, you could post on LinkedIn, you could put some publications that you've worked on in your LinkedIn profile, but just showing like, hey, I'm out there. Here's what I do. And not worrying too much about, having to be the best at everything. Cause I don't even think that's possible. I know we're going to talk later about kind of what skills are needed for data viz. It's impossible to be the best at everything. So just like picking one, maybe it's your content area, maybe it's your software skills, maybe it's more of your project management and communication skills, just playing on the strength that you already have and making that public in some way.
Great. Thank you, Anne. Rebecca?
So I agree with that. I think that having a portfolio helps a lot because there's no other way to gain credibility and to prove your expertise or your skills if you don't have something to show, right? I mean, you can talk forever, but showing is more powerful, right, than just saying it. I would say also connecting with people, networking, and I think Anne mentioned this as well. That's very important, and you can connect with people, to learn about how they got where they are, or you can connect with people so that later on, when you're ready to apply for a job, you have a network already, right? You shouldn't start networking when you're ready to apply for a job or to transition to a new field. You should always network, right? So always have that ready. And then I would say, data visualization is a very fragmented field. to Anne's point, I mean, there are so many skills that one could have. I mean, I don't have all the skills. I don't know if anyone has all the skills, right? I mean, it happens often that someone creates a visualization and I'm like, I don't know how they did that. And yeah, I mean, you cannot know it all. I think it's a matter of understanding what your niche is and what you're trying to do in data visualization. Again, whether that's static or interactive visualizations, whether that's business or more, art visualizations, or maybe it's about the industry that you're trying to get into, and then specializing in that, right? I mean, for example, you want to get into real estate, right, and visualize that data. Then just work with that data specifically, right? Create a portfolio that's specialized in that area, so that again the visuals speak for your skills when you're ready to get a job in the field.
I really like the fact that both of you stress that nobody can know it all. So I think people should not be nervous about, knowing all the tools, knowing all the strategies about data visualization, but kind of make a portfolio, focus on one area and build it from there. Okay, I think we can handle one more question before we move on to the Q&A section. So what are the key skills required to be successful in data viz? How important is the tool?
I'll give you the 1 minute answer because this is another one I feel like we could talk about for so long. We'll have to have a part 2 or something. Okay. One thing we haven't touched on yet is chart choosing. Are you going to use a pie chart or a bar chart or something else altogether? It is very difficult to take a table of data, rows and columns of summary statistics, and figure out what chart's that going to be. I think a lot of people go to the standard charts, like it's a pie chart with 50 million slices and hard to read. Or in my line of work, I see a lot of bar charts. It's like, here's a column chart, and then there's a bar chart, and then they have a clustered column chart, and then they have a stacked column chart. It's like all bar charts all the time because it's such a hard thing to master. So one activity that you could try for yourself is find a table of data, just a little, it doesn't have to be a huge table. It's not raw data, maybe 5 rows and 5 columns of data on any topic of your choosing. And then set your timer, just grab your phone, set your timer for 10, 15 minutes. And then it doesn't even have to be on software, speaking to the unimportance of tools in my mind. Just grab your pen and paper and see how many ideas you can come up with. Can you come up with 2 ideas? Oh, maybe it's a bar chart, and maybe it's a line chart. Can you come up with 5 ideas? Maybe it's a waffle chart. Maybe it's a tree map. Maybe it's a social network map. Maybe it's a geographic map. Maybe it stays as a table, but it has a heat table and like color coding effect. And when I started doing this, I would literally only be able to come up with 2 ideas during a 15-minute brainstorming session. And now I can come up with like 15 ideas in a 15-minute brainstorming session. So it's just important to do this all the time and be trying to just generate as many ideas as you can, because they're all going to be correct. So then you have to narrow it down to like, well, which one does my audience need? And which one do they need for the slideshow version versus the 1-pager version? And like, just at least having a pool of good ideas to choose from is so critical.
Rebecca?
So, yeah, I think I was thinking as Anne was speaking, yeah, I could talk about this forever. I think it goes back to the fact that data visualization is such a fragmented field, but I would say start with kind of laying the foundation and then build from there. So just make sure you have a basic understanding of, how to work with data. That's key, right? Because it's called data visualization. But then, data visualization is data, but then also visualization. So then understand some key design concepts. And then a third layer, I would say that's kind of foundational, is psychology, understanding your audience, right? Really stepping out of your shoes and putting yourself in the shoes of your audience, understanding perception, right? What would your audience look at? Why? What's the attention span? Just a little bit of understanding that. So I think those are like the 3 key layers that would set the foundation. And from there, you build depending on the direction that you're trying to take. So if you want to do, business data visualizations, then maybe start with the software that you think would be required. So do Excel if you want to specialize in Excel, or learn Tableau, or if you think that it's important to learn more than one software, try to learn more than one. And practice, creating visualizations that go beyond the templates that are already available. I think that's very important because anyone can use the templates already available, right? It's about taking it one step further. And I fully agree with the exercise that Anne suggested, just sketching, because that allows you to be, just yourself with the data and with the story that you're trying to tell. And it removes any constraints that a tool will impose, because inevitably, no one is perfect in any tool, right? We are all constantly learning. So just being yourself with the data, with the pen and paper, allows for more creativity and more iteration. And once you figure out what the story is, what the right chart is, then you can start figuring out how to create it in a tool. But first, know what you're trying to create.
Thank you so much. Thank you both. I really learned a lot today, and I'm definitely going to do the pen and paper trick that you both suggested.